Okay, Jonas, I have a couple more questions. I am curious how shifting time impacts the brain. Now, as somebody who works with language patterns a lot, I know that when I use shift from present tense to past tense to future tense, it creates confusion for the conscious mind, but I also know it creates freedom for the unconscious mind to make more changes more quickly because I'm like in charge of putting their attention in different places. Okay. So, what I want to know is, because this is interesting to me, because that's what I'm doing when I say, so whenever you go to get that experience and have had it now, how would it look in the future now that you've done it in the past? Now, if I say that in one sentence, a person's brain is like, or mind is like going, huh, what? Say, and so that negative emotion, how is it now that it's gone now completely? And it's like, what? So that's the kind of thing that I'm talking about, where it's an old hypnotic tool where the idea is you can move a person around in time based upon the tense that you're using in your language. So you can already have something healed before it's actually healed to the person's conscious mind, but you've moved it all around. So one of the magical things about the brain and human beings. So my question is, does visualizing that you've already reached your destination and are now enjoying it, in other words, you're looking at it as something that you've done in the past, does that have a different impact on the brain from visualizing yourself striving toward your goal with the journey and the destination still ahead of you waiting to be traveled?
Wow, it's a great question, and I'm gonna try to answer the part of it that I can connect to what we
Okay.
do. I don't know if this will satisfy the question, but there has been a lot of research recently in neuroscience on what we call mental time travel.
Okay.
That is leaving the present moment and thinking about other times and places. That could be going back into your own past, traversing through your memories, or it could be imagining the future. What is your life going to be like in another time? Mm-hmm. And interestingly, there are specific brain networks that come online and become really active when we do that kind of mental time travel.
Okay.
Leave the present moment. And there's almost this flip-flopping that the brain does. We have certain brain networks that come online when we think about other times and places, and some brain networks that completely go off when we do that. And these two brain networks seem to go back and forth. If we're focused on what's in front of us and we're doing something that's got our attention, then these mental time travel networks are low, and then they come back up when we think about other times and places. It's interesting that this was discovered in neuroscience mostly by accident, as most great discoveries were, because we had all these times when people were lying inside the brain imaging scanners, not doing anything. And it turns out when people are just asked to lie still and do nothing, this is what they do. They imagine the future, they think about the past, and we see this tremendous amount of energy expenditure in these special brain networks that have come to be known as the default mode network. Because the idea was that this is kind of a default state that the brain goes back to when it's not engaged in anything specific that's right in front of it. We just float into other times and places.
So you could say that if I'm just sitting there, if I'm not practicing mindfulness and I'm not consciously attempting to stay in the present moment with what's happening, the mind will naturally either go back and do things or go in the future. And that's what you call the monkey mind, right? In the meditation world.
Yep, it wanders. It wanders off. Yeah. And what's interesting is that when we look at what happens in the brain when people read stories, or when they think about themselves, we also see activity in this default mode network, because it's very much an overlapping process with the kind of thinking that you have to do to process a story. A story takes place somewhere else, not in the here and now. And your own self is also not in the here and now. It's a narrative that you're constructing. So this kind of mind wandering and narrative thought are very much related.
I love that it's essentially the default way that it works, and that you have to really, well, you don't have to, I guess, but the more you put attention into taking charge of that and being in the moment, then what I'm hearing, if I'm correct, is that it would be less the other ones won't take over. If you're here, the minute you're not here, these other default systems come into play.
Yeah, that's right. And so what we see in meditators, for example, people who train with mindfulness meditation, is that
Yeah.
they tend to have less activity in the default mode network, and
Yeah.
their default mode network is less coherent. And it's
Yeah.
really during those times when people are really doing focused meditation, that's when you see it really low.
I think it's helpful for people to understand this to some degree, because I hear people a lot say, meditation is too hard, I can't do it. But if they maybe can understand that you're really standing up to a default mechanism in your system, you're standing up and saying, I don't want to do that. I want to be right here. And that takes practice, just like when you learn to walk, you had to fall down a lot before you got the whole mind body thing got together, this muscle coordination thing where you actually could stand up and walk. It's kind of the same thing. So this is very helpful, I think, for people to understand. It's not that they're not good at it. It's that nobody's good at it, because it's just the default system. So to come back to the center place requires some practice. And I think understanding this is helpful. So I really appreciate that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I think part of the reason it is there and that the brain devotes so much energy to it is that it is an important and valuable mode of thought to go into, right? I mean, we are thinking about other times and places because we're preparing for them, and because we're learning something from it, and because we're constructing ourselves, because it's useful to have a meaning construction mechanism in our minds.
Absolutely. I mean, I think it's interesting. When I read something in your biography or whatever about you were interested in the meaning making process, which is the fundamental issue that NLP deals with, is that we are meaning making machines, and there's just no way around that. We have to make meaning. And of course, in the NLP and hypnosis world, the past is said to be where your learnings are gathered, and the future is where possibilities are, but the present is where you have to take action. You don't actually get action. Is
That's
that
true. And to stick with our theme of paradox, while it's true that mode of thought is valuable, it can also become too much. And if we over engage with that mode of meaning making, for example, some forms of depression are associated with overactivity of the default mode network. You're involved in constantly ruminating and overthinking things. So.
Well, what's curious too is in the world of, I work a lot with people who meditate a lot over the last 40 years. I was privy to working with a lot of people on many different spiritual paths. And the being able to be in the present is useful, but it was also, if they were there too much, curiously enough, it became a problem, because the past receded and possibilities were irrelevant, because they were just in the here and now, living out of the moment and being with whatever their spiritual connection might have been. And their personal and professional lives, or whatever financial lives, went to ruin.
Yeah, that's right. I mean, I think that the truly valuable skill that one learns in meditation is not really to be in that state. It's to be able to manipulate which state that you're in, because states both have their own advantages and disadvantages, and we want to be able to consciously choose when to employ them.
Absolutely. And then the real interesting question comes up is, who is it who's doing the choosing? And that's the real interesting question. Who's behind it all? But that's such a great point, Jonas. I mean, I think that's the whole point that I'm working with, is trying to give us the freedom to be able to choose, where do we want to go? Or do we need to learn? Do we need to look at possibilities? Do we need to be here? So yeah, that was great. Thank you. I got one more question here. All right. What happens in the brain, if you know, when you shift a laser-like focus on a problem to a wider, more diffuse focus, like putting it in a bigger picture or context?
Oh, yeah. Oh, wow. Okay, let me try to distill this. I could talk about that one for hours. The brain is so good at doing this kind of focus and goal-directed activity. And one of the things that happens is that when we have a goal in mind, the brain is very good at filtering out information that is irrelevant to that goal. So we walk into a room to find a pencil, and all we see is whether everything's a pencil or not. We don't see, even if there's a gorilla behind the chair, we may miss it if we're just looking for the pencil. We got that, like you said, laser focus, and it's a very efficient way to run a brain. The brain does that because it helps us to solve problems, and it's very good. But the downside is that there's so much information that we're going to miss when we're just looking for that pencil. And so when we switch our mode of thought to a more open awareness, the brain is processing a lot more information, and it's not gating and filtering everything out based on what it's trying to do, and that allows us to experience more things at once. Now, as we talked about before, these different states of mind have pros and cons. It's when you're in that open awareness state, it's harder to get things done. And depending on how you got there, you're going to see different things happening in the brain. If you're focusing on your body, for example, you might see processes in the brain that are involved in body awareness, and the parietal lobe or in the insular cortex increase in their activity. We tend to see that. So it really depends on how you got there and what you did. But the main point is that the brain is going to be processing information in very different ways in these two states.
I know that in working with wanting to help people become more aware of paradox and to see that polar opposites are actually one whole. I note in my study of mystic psychology or awakened psychology, one of the primary differences in the psychology was the way in which they related to opposites, because the opposites in their psychology was one whole thing. There was competitive collaboration. It wasn't antagonistic conflict. So the way that they related to it made it relevant for them to notice it when it was around, because it was helpful. It was competitive collaboration. It was like they're able to see it as one whole thing, because you can't have a coin without both sides, right? So that's like inherent in the system. And I'm finding that one of the difficult things in working with introducing the paradoxical mindset is that the mind doesn't pay any attention to it. It just deletes the whole idea that it could possibly ever be one whole. It's just like, that's not relevant. So it's not like it's like a judgment call. It's just not relevant. So I just say that because I run into that a lot, where it just doesn't seem to be relevant. So it just goes like this, over our head. So how do you is there some way that you can direct the brain, other than, I guess we've been talking about it, towards looking at something that it thought was relevant and now it thought was irrelevant and now becomes relevant? Is there a specific way that you can get the brain to do something like that?
I mean, practice. Yeah, you just have to practice, and being aware of your own goal directedness, I think, is really important, and to recognize that we just process such a small percentage of the sensory information that comes into our brain is actually attended to. That we're constantly filtering things out, and just knowing that is helpful, and so that we can think about in each moment what we're filtering out and why. I mean, right now I'm talking to you. It's important for me to focus on the screen and not on the scene that's around me and all the different things that are happening. And I want to do that. So the fact that I'm aware that I'm doing that helps me in accomplishing my goals right now. So I think that level of awareness is the start.
Seems as if awareness is highly important. I have one last question. And is this ability to shift to a bigger context, a bigger picture, is this why spiritual perspectives that seem to encompass the whole or a larger picture simply by its nature can have such a big impact in helping people accept things that they don't understand?
I think so. Yeah. I mean, I think, there's a lot of levels to that question, I guess. One thing is that when we aren't engaging with this kind of mind-wandering default mode network, we're also less aware of ourselves. And it's no surprise to me that various meditation practices can help people arrive at states of self-transcendence, because we're not as much engaged in this meaning-making process, which interprets everything with relationship to ourself, and as a form of conceptual thought. If you're trying to get to a conceptual thought that transcends all the boundaries of all the various concepts that we have that delineate in the world into X and Y and self and non-self, then you have to give that mode of thought a rest. And we are capable of doing that. It involves a big shift in our perspective, but we can do it. And that I think is part of what spiritual traditions tend to point people towards.
Yeah, I think so too. I think that the more that we get the bigger picture and we step into that, it helps, it changes your sense of identity, I think for sure, for most people, which is oftentimes the real thing that makes things change, is who we think we are, how we hold ourselves to be. I really appreciate your giving me your time today. And I hope as I come up with more questions and things I discover, you'll come back and have some more conversation with me. I really appreciate it. And you've got so much to say about that. I'm in love with narrative, story, self-concept, and identity as well. So I love talking with you. You have
Great.
any last things you want to share?
No, just that I appreciate the conversation, and it's always great to hear your perspective. So thanks for talking with me.
And thank you very much, Jonas, too. You take care. Thank you.
Bye.